In the year 14 BBY, Vader was well established as the Emperor's second-in-command. As was usual for the Siths, they seek to overthrow their master. Starkiller would be the tool Vader turns toward to finally defeat Palpatine once and for all. Chapter 1. Discovered by Vader. It was the height of the Clone Wars, and the Jedi were scattered all across the galaxy, protecting Allied systems against the Separatists. Kota Marek, a Jedi general, was on the planet Talos, eager to prove himself while fighting for the Republic. During his stay on Talos, he became acquainted with Mali, another Jedi. Despite their differences in opinions, with Mali sympathizing more with the victims of the war instead of the Republic, the two grew emotionally close. Emotional and romantic attachments were prohibited in the Jedi Order, but Kota and Mali married in secret. They eventually renounced their allegiance to the Jedi Order, exiling themselves to Kashyyyk just before the end of the Clone Wars. Their self-imposed exile spared their lives when Chancellor Palpatine, secretly the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, issued Order 66. The Republic's clone army slaughtered the Jedi one by one, killing almost every one of them throughout the galaxy. Palpatine would eventually reorganize the Republic into the Galactic Empire while branding the Jedi as traitors. Darth Vader, formerly Anakin Skywalker, became the Empire's enforcer, an attack dog sent after any Jedi who survived Order 66. Although he felt guilt for not being there to help his Jedi comrades, Kota decided it was best for him and Mali to move from one planet to another, before deciding to stay hidden and live among the Wookiees of Kashyyyk. During their time on that planet, the two Jedi exiles gave birth to a son named Galen Marek. The boy was born with the gift of the Force, much like his parents. Not long after Galen's birth, Mali died defending the Wookiees from a group of Trandoshan slavers. During the early years of the Empire, Darth Vader's sole mission was the purge of the Jedi that had survived Order 66. The Sith Lord had recently learned that the Wookiees of Kashyyyk had been hiding a Jedi for years, prompting him to launch an invasion on the planet. While the rest of the Imperial forces focused on the Wookiee uprising, Vader pursued his own objective of hunting the fugitive Jedi. Vader easily carved his way through Wookiee fighters before reaching a hut that had the Marek family crest. There, he confronted the exiled Jedi, who proved to be no match for the Dark Lord. Vader easily overwhelmed Kota, but sensed the presence of a much more powerful Force wielder. Thinking this was Kento's master, Vader used a Force choke to grip the defeated Jedi, demanding to know where the stronger foe was hiding. Marek, however, told Vader that the Sith Lord had already killed his master long ago. As Vader was prepared to kill Kota, he felt his lightsaber slipping from his fingers. It had been telekinetically pulled by the young Galen Marek almost by instinct. Vader quickly deduced this was Kento's son and the very same powerful presence he felt moments ago. As Kota urged the boy to run away, the Sith Lord quickly crushed his throat, leaving Galen orphaned. Left shocked and horrified, Galen pointed Vader's lightsaber at him before a stormtrooper squad arrived. The squad's Imperial commander, realizing the boy was a threat that needed to be disposed of, signaled his troops to execute Galen under the assumption that this was what Vader wanted all along. However, they were fatally wrong. The Sith Lord telekinetically pulled his lightsaber back to him, slaughtering the commander and the rest of the squad in front of the boy. He wanted no witness to what he was about to do next. Instead of killing Marek, Vader commanded him to come with him, taking him to a personal Super Star Destroyer, the Executor, which was still under construction at this point. The young Galen was about to experience pain like he had never before. A new life lay ahead of him. Chapter 2. Training under Vader. Darth Vader's ultimate goal, like any other Sith Lord, was to betray his master and take his place. But he wasn't strong enough to face Darth Sidious on his own as he was. The wounds he suffered in the duel on Mustafar had weakened his potential in the Force, while leaving him vulnerable in his machine-like state. To that end, he had always wanted his own apprentice, one powerful enough to stand by his side to defeat the Emperor. That was what Marek was for, because his potential in the Force was almost on par with Darth Sidious himself, an unprecedented talent that only came once every generation. Given the codename Starkiller, the traumatized apprentice had repressed all the memories of his life before he met Vader. He did not know any life other than the one he had lived ever since the Sith took him to the Executor. So, for nearly 2 decades, he trained in the ways of the Sith under Vader, honing his talents in the Force and turning him into a weapon who had enough potential to become powerful enough to challenge Sidious. But Vader was not a patient and forgiving master. He was no Jedi, after all. He trained Starkiller in ways that were more like torture. One training session saw him dropping the young Galen on the planet Honoghr without any weapons, and then ordering a party of Noghri death commandos to hunt him down. He wanted his apprentice to learn how to survive in the harshest and cruelest ways. To that end, Starkiller also learned how to draw power from his hatred, one of the Sith's greatest strengths. However, as he didn't have enough time to completely dedicate to Galen's training, he had Galen develop his own methods and techniques by engaging in tests and sparring sessions with his training holodroid, Proxy. This droid was capable of imitating Jedi like Obi Wan Kenobi, using their fighting techniques to spar with the apprentice to hone his lightsaber skills. Proxy also regularly attacked him, consistent with Vader's wishes, with the intent to kill to keep Starkiller's senses and wits sharp and ready for any surprise. After all, his primary programming was to kill the apprentice, ensuring he would never hold back whenever they sparred. However, Starkiller and Proxy developed a close bond beyond that of master and droid. Their friendship was one of the reasons Marek wasn't entirely devoid of compassion, despite his harsh upbringing under Darth Vader. But growing up in cruelty and believing he needed trauma and pain to grow stronger, Starkiller forced himself to suffer. During one of his self-inflicted horrors, he had Proxy chain him in the dark while depriving him of nourishment until he could successfully use the Force to assemble a lightsaber. He failed in that exercise, but grew stronger because of the pain and suffering he felt. This was but one of many challenges he'd impose on himself. Still, no matter how strong he got, the one thing he couldn't do was use the Force to experience visions of the future, a skill quite common among Force-sensitive individuals. Breaking from his usual routine would surprise him because he couldn't see into the future. This failure frustrated him, making him believe he wasn't strong enough just yet. After all, he was raised to be the strong and powerful for one singular purpose: the assassination of Darth Sidious. He was driven not only by his loyalty to Vader, whom he considered the closest thing to a father, but also by his desire to fulfill what he thought was his reason for existing. To that end, he longed to be a true Sith apprentice. While Vader trained him in the ways of the dark side, he was yet to truly acknowledge him as an apprentice. Believing Starkiller was not yet ready to fulfill his purpose. So, for years, the Sith Lord sent him on various missions as his personal assassin and enforcer, even killing Imperial personnel Vader deemed problematic. Starkiller never had any problems killing the Empire's own people, believing this was his form of service to the Empire. In 3 BBY, Starkiller engaged his master in what seemed to be a routine practice duel between them. However, at the end of the sparring match, Vader ordered Starkiller to kneel before him. The assassin was confused, not knowing why Vader would order him to do something he had never done before. At first, he thought his master had grown disappointed in him. After all, Vader trained him to learn how to be strong or to die as a failure. But his loyalty to Vader overcame his confusion as he obeyed and waited for death. However, Vader acknowledged Starkiller for the first time, formally knighting and recognizing him as his apprentice. The Sith Lord declared Starkiller's training complete before giving him the most important test of his life at that time. He was sent to kill Master Rahm Kota, a powerful Jedi survivor of Order 66. Chapter 3. Meeting Juno and Rahm Kota. Rahm Kota was one of the Jedi Order's best generals during the Clone Wars. He was considered a military genius, capable of not only fierce combat, but incredible tactics that turned him into a legend. Only a few Jedi generals, including Anakin Skywalker and Obi Wan Kenobi, surpassed his accomplishments during the Clone Wars. But what really stood out about Kota was his refusal to use clones for battle. It was not because he knew they were wired to betray the Jedi. Instead, he simply didn't think the clones were fit for battle and didn't trust them. So he relied on his own militia. With no clones to betray him, Rahm Kota survived Order 66 and fled to the Outer Rim, where he dedicated his life to fighting the Empire. At the time Vader ordered Starkiller to kill Kota, the former Jedi Master was attacking an Imperial shipyard above Nar Shaddaa. He was told to bring Kota's lightsaber back as proof of his success. Vader also told his apprentice to leave no witnesses behind, even if it meant killing their own forces, an order Starkiller struggled to comprehend because of his loyalty to the Empire. But the assassin hid his feelings because he did not wish to displease his master. Starkiller convinced himself that killing Kota and eliminating Imperial witnesses along the way were just parts of his rise as a Sith. As Starkiller approached his personal starship, the Rogue Shadow, he was surprised to see a new face greeting him. This was his new pilot, Juno Eclipse. While the assassin had become a skilled pilot in his own right, Vader often assigned him pilots so that he could focus on his missions instead of piloting his ship. But being Starkiller's personal pilot wasn't easy. Not only because the missions required stealth and secrecy, but also because Vader wasn't an easy master to work for. There had already been 8 pilots assigned to him before Juno. One of those pilots was even executed under Vader's orders for being tardy. More than that, this was the first time Starkiller had a female pilot. But Juno was not an ordinary pilot. She was accepted into the Imperial Academy at 14, eventually graduating at the top of her class. Juno quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a captain and attracting the attention of Vader, who was once the most skilled pilot in the Republic. Juno earned the command of the Black 8 Squadron, Darth Vader's elite unit of 8 TIE fighter pilots. Her skills were elite as far as pilots were concerned, but Juno didn't have the ruthlessness Vader wanted from the commander of the Black 8 Squadron. Though she considered working under the second most powerful man in the Empire in honor, she also didn't share the same love for brutality that the Sith Lord had. The Sith Lord's tactics weighed down on her, testing her loyalty several times. One such time was the bombing of Kalos, where she assaulted a beaten and defenseless planet to sterilize it under Vader's orders. She had obvious doubts about the necessity of the bombing, but still complied out of loyalty to her superior. Vader sensed all those doubts and her lack of ruthlessness, prompting him to reassign Eclipse to the Rogue Shadow as Starkiller's personal pilot. Starkiller himself, being unfamiliar with Juno's background, believed having the female pilot around was just yet another one of Vader's many tests for him. As the trio departed for Nar Shaddaa, Proxy informed Starkiller about Rahm Kota's background as a respected Jedi general during the war. But for many years after surviving the Clone Wars, Kota disappeared into hiding, eluding the Empire for nearly 2 decades before suddenly reappearing in a not-so-subtle way, attacking the Empire outright. The odd circumstances surrounding Kota's sudden appearance convinced Starkiller that the Jedi deliberately wanted the Empire to find him for what was still an unknown reason at that time. More doubts started to creep into Starkiller upon his arrival at Nar Shaddaa, because most of his eventual victims were Imperial forces. The only way he could steel his resolve was to convince himself this was just another test from his master. So, as he made his way through the TIE fighter construction facility on the planet, he blasted through Imperial forces, eventually chasing after any survivors who witnessed his abilities. But upon learning that Kota's militia had stormed the command center, Starkiller rerouted his destination, killing anyone in his path. Kota's forces thought he was a special kind of shadow trooper, whereas the Imperial forces believed he was a Jedi survivor. Whatever the case, the assassin hastily made his way to the command center as Kota's forces had just bombed the facility, forcing it to fall out of the sky. As soon as he reached the command center, Starkiller saw Rahm Kota patiently waiting for whoever was coming after him. But both were surprised by what they saw. The assassin didn't think the Jedi he was sent to kill was a hardened veteran because he believed that the Jedi were soft from living a life of privilege. On the other hand, Kota thought Vader was going to personally come after him, not expecting it would be this boy that stood before him. The two Force users fought a hard and close battle, with each fighter finding ways to counter their opponent's attacks. But Starkiller eventually pulled back to fight a more defensive style reminiscent of Form 3, a style he learned from his many training sessions with Proxy, mimicking the legendary Obi Wan Kenobi's fighting techniques. Kota tried his best to break through the assassin's defenses, using slow yet deliberate attacks that he chained with quick strikes. He hoped he would tire his opponent out, but Starkiller held strong. The younger fighter realized the Jedi's guard had begun to slip, quickly prompting him to counter. During his onslaught, Starkiller realized that while Kota was skilled and strong, his age and rejection of the dark side held him back. The general could not regain the offensive, prompting him to complement the assassin's skills. With desperation taking over Kota, he used the Force to break the entire command center free from the rest of the shipyard to send it down into Nar Shaddaa's atmosphere. The duel renewed, with both fighters locking blades. Neither duelist had the advantage over the other until Kota saw a Force vision of Starkiller's fate. Kota told him that Vader wasn't always going to be the young apprentice's master, but he froze after finding out through the Force that he was going to be part of this young man's future. As that was happening, Starkiller was more concerned with overpowering the older fighter in the blade lock. Distracted by his vision, Kota could not keep up with the assassin's strength as Starkiller pushed the Jedi's blade into his eyes, blinding him. This was the first time he ever claimed victory over an actual Jedi outside of his training sessions with Proxy. A defeated Kota was stumbling backward, open for a killing blow, but before Starkiller could do so, he experienced his own vision of his forgotten father telling him to run. The assassin pulled back, believing that the Jedi was using mind tricks to confuse him into dropping his guard. But this was the opening Kota needed. He dropped his lightsaber and used the Force to shatter the windows of the command center, escaping by dropping into the planet's atmosphere. Disappointed that he failed in killing the Jedi, Starkiller retrieved Kota's lightsaber and jumped through the window, landing on the rogue shadow as it passed by. He knew that Kota was no longer going to be a problem after blinding him, but he could not celebrate his empty victory because he failed in his task of killing the Jedi Master. Still, Vader was impressed that his apprentice could go toe-to-toe with a skilled master despite failing to kill the former. Chapter 4: Starkiller's Trials Against the Jedi and the Sith. Starkiller may have bested a true and experienced Jedi Master in combat, proving his extraordinary potential in the Force, but Vader's doubts about his apprentice were more about his resolve and focus, instead of his skills. In the Sith Lord's mind, had Starkiller been more focused on his task, he would have killed Rahm Kota instead of simply blinding him. So, to further develop his apprentice's skills and focus, Vader sent Starkiller on a mission to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. At that time, the temple had become a ruin of its former glory, having been destroyed by the Empire after the events of Order 66. It may have been abandoned, but the Empire still maintained troops there out of the possibility that one of the surviving Jedi might go there. So, as soon as Juno Eclipse landed the rogue shadow just outside the front gate, Starkiller was met with resistance by none other than Imperial troops. Emperor Palpatine had ordered the temple to be off-limits to the public. But Starkiller had no patience for diplomacy. Instead of trying to talk his way out of it, he immediately attacked the garrison stationed there, killing his way into the entrance hall of the Jedi Temple. But as soon as he made his way to the Jedi Trials Chamber, the place a Padawan goes to take their Jedi trials in the hope of becoming a true Jedi Knight, Starkiller experienced a vision, hearing his father's voice warning him that he needed to prepare for the upcoming test. While he was still trying to make sense of the vision, he was blasted by a red Force lightning attack. This surge could not have come from a Jedi or even an ordinary Sith, because it was far too powerful. Instead, it came from Darth Desilus, a former Jedi Master who fell to the dark side thousands of years ago. Long ago, Desilus rebelled against the Jedi Order and took on the mantle of the Sith Lord, before leading a violent war against his former comrades. His insurrection was short-lived because he fell into a trap and was killed by the Jedi Council of his time. But because the Jedi deemed him a powerful and fearsome Sith, they created a holographic simulation modeled after him to serve as a test for Padawans during their trials. The one that had just attacked Starkiller was not the genuine article, but rather a simulation that survived despite the widespread destruction all over the temple. Desilus's hologram was almost just as aggressive and fierce as the real one, wasting no time in seizing the offensive against Starkiller. But the assassin fought back well enough to use his creativity and mastery of the Force to crush it beneath the gigantic Palpatine statue. He completed his trial, the same test Padawans go through in their quest to become Jedi Knights. As soon as he defeated the memory of a long-gone Sith Lord, Starkiller received a message from his master through Proxy's own communication capabilities. Vader's sources had just located another Jedi, Kazdan Paratus, hiding in Raxus Prime. At that time, the Sith Lord was confident that Paratus was more powerful than his apprentice, believing that Starkiller's chances of survival were slim. But he assured his apprentice that defeating Paratus would mean he was growing strong enough to eventually fulfill his ultimate destiny of dethroning the Emperor. Unbeknownst to the master and pupil, Eclipse had eavesdropped on their conversation, giving her a better idea of who she was working with. Raxus Prime was a long way from Coruscant, allowing Starkiller to get to know more about his target. There was little to no information about Peritus, but what Proxy's record did indicate was that he was a secluded Jedi Master who was gifted in droid construction. He only took part in the Clone Wars to study the droids the Separatists used against the Republic. Peritus used his knowledge to construct a droid army that took the place of his clone troopers when they were killed in a fight against the Separatists. So, he only survived because there were no more clone troopers left under his command during Order 66. As soon as the trio arrived on Raxus Prime, Juno called Starkiller to the cockpit to begin their search for the Jedi Master, only for them to be surprised by the facade of a crude Jedi temple meant to imitate the one on Coruscant. It was clear to him that Peritus built this temple, prompting Starkiller to begin his search there. The rogue shadow landed as close to the temple as possible, forcing Starkiller to traverse the dangerous junk-filled landscape leading to his target's whereabouts. But he was not alone, because Rodian salvagers fancied the planet to salvage junk parts. Starkiller remembered his master's commands of leaving no witnesses. This time, eliminating everyone was easier because he was not attacking Imperial troops. Then there was the fact that the Rodians wanted to make a quick buck out of the assassin. The Empire, after the events on Nar Shaddaa, had just issued a bounty for the mysterious attacker. Starkiller cleared his way through the scavengers before proceeding to the Imitation Jedi Temple. As he ascended the temple, Starkiller saw resistance in the form of Kazdan Peritus's own droids. But this was an easy fight, for he had spent years sparring with Proxy, a more sophisticated and advanced droid. Peritus's sentries were no match for the power of the assassin, but it was too early to celebrate because Starkiller had to go up against a massive droid golem that put up a destructive fight. The battle took Starkiller into the temple's version of the Jedi Council chamber, where he saw imitation mannequins of the Jedi Council members during the Clone Wars. That was when Starkiller realized madness had taken over Peritus, for no sane Jedi would have gone through all the trouble of building an imitation Jedi temple complete with junk versions of the Jedi Council. The assassin eventually disabled the golem, which wasn't just a simple droid. Instead, there had been someone controlling it from inside. It was Kazdan Peritus himself, as the Jedi left the golem's chassis and prepared for the second round of his fight with Starkiller. Peritus was an Alina, a being not that much bigger than Jedi Master Yoda, but while Peritus may have been small, he augmented his size and mobility using a four-limbed mechanical harness on his back. He also wielded a lightsaber pike, allowing him to neutralize the height and length advantage most of his opponents had had against him. Peritus was indeed more skilled than Starkiller, deftly blocking all of his strikes with his lightsaber pike, but there was one big weakness the Sith assassin was quick to notice. His opponent had mechanical limbs, the very same reasons why Darth Vader could not use Force Lightning, the bread-and-butter Force power of the Sith. In Vader's case, using Force Lightning would naturally disrupt the circuits of his mechanical parts. The same applied to Peritus, as Starkiller blasted the Jedi Master with his Force Lightning, thinking the battle would end early. But unbeknownst to him, the mannequin versions of the Jedi Masters in that room were actually droids that were combat-ready. They were all capable of the same fighting style as the originals they were meant to imitate, but still, they weren't even close to their skills. Still, the numbers game gave Starkiller some trouble, especially when he still had to deal with Peritus's attacks. But he fought back, destroying every Jedi mannequin. Finally, he flung the Yoda droid at Peritus. He was sad at the death of the Masters, putting him in a vulnerable situation. Starkiller realized that Peritus had gone mad in all those years of solitude. He countered every single one of Peritus's attacks, shattering his weapon and eventually crushing him under a chunk of machinery. Peritus lay dying as he felt further sorrow at his failure to protect the Jedi. He died in a brilliant flash of Force energy as Starkiller had just killed his first Jedi. Despite his success, the Sith assassin was conflicted. He was moved by Peritus's emotional display. After all, the Jedi Master's madness was not born out of malice. Instead, it was born out of his emotional trauma when he couldn't do anything to save the Jedi Temple and the Council. Still, Starkiller repressed his emotions and took off to return to his master. But before he could even think about his victory, Starkiller received another message from his master, who ordered him to return to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant for one more trial. This time, the second visit proved to be more troublesome. After his first infiltration, where he made short work of the Imperial garrison stationed there, Starkiller quickly realized security had been increased. The entrance had Imperial Senate sentinels. Meanwhile, the garrison now had snipers. Despite the improved security level, Starkiller was still too powerful for the Imperial forces to contain as he advanced into the temple. Exiting the main entrance hall, he experienced another vision of his father. This time, it warned him not to be blinded by his anger, the emotion that helped make him powerful. The assassin entered the Jedi archives, but instead of anything suspicious, it was Juno Eclipse at the end of the hall, looking like she was in pain. Worried about her, Starkiller approached her with his guard down, only for Juno to leap into the air to attack him. This was not his personal pilot. Instead, it was another holographic simulation, another Sith Lord in the form of Darth Phobos. As her name suggests, Darth Phobos fed off the phobias or fears of her enemies, using them to her advantage by assuming the forms of the things people feared the most. This skill made her a bane to both the Jedi and the Sith alike thousands of years ago. Fearing Phobos would only grow stronger, the Jedi and the Sith worked together to bring her down. Due to her ability to enter minds and tap into the things people feared the most, she made an excellent trial for Jedi Padawans. After all, a true Jedi needed to let go of their fears. Yoda said it best when he considered fear to be the path to the dark side.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
The fight with this hologram proved to be different compared to Decimus. Phobos often retreated into the shadows, prompting Starkiller to fend off surprise attacks instead of being more aggressive with his offense. But as the hologram sensed defeat, it switched to a more desperate style by projecting copies of itself, and even disguising itself as Juno. At times, Starkiller hesitated, not wanting to attack a mere imitation of his ally, but he steeled his resolve, delivering a finishing blow by driving his lightsaber through Phobos' chest. While it may have been true that Starkiller overcame Phobos and his fears, the interesting aspect of that fight was the fact that Phobos took on the form of Juno in pain. It became clear that Starkiller's greatest fear was not his master, the Emperor, or even failure to fulfill his mission. Instead, deep in his core, he subconsciously feared losing Juno, even though they had not known each other for a long time. But at that time, he was yet to realize this fear or make sense of it, because he was more focused on pleasing his master and fulfilling what he thought was his ultimate destiny as a Sith. His master, however, was not yet done with him. Vader once again contacted Starkiller through Proxy to inform him of a new development. While Vader congratulated him for beating Phobos, he quickly charged him with hunting down Shaak Ti on Felucia. The Sith Lord warned his apprentice that he would need the full power of the dark side if he wanted to overcome this Jedi Master's strength. Shaak Ti was not only an accomplished Jedi General during the Clone Wars, but was a leading member of the Jedi Council, making her one of the most powerful and accomplished Jedi of her time. But while he was about to face a legend, Starkiller's focus was elsewhere. As the Rogue Shadow was making its way to Felucia, the assassin stayed silent, speaking only to give orders. Throughout that time, he avoided any of Juno's attempts to converse, seemingly bothered by the fact that Phobos took the form of his pilot. But there was also something else bothering him. Starkiller had sensed emotional conflict within Juno. He eventually asked her about the disturbance he felt in her. True enough, Juno did indeed feel conflicted about everything she had done, including the bombing of Kalos, which turned a green and thriving jungle world into a dead planet with little to no life. In his efforts to calm his pilot's emotions, Starkiller merely told her that she was following her orders to the end, even if she may have felt conflicted about the effects of her actions. The assassin quickly shifted his focus to his mission as soon as the Rogue Shadow landed on an overgrown mushroom on Felucia. Starkiller made his way through the jungle, only to encounter Felucian natives who proved to be more challenging than the common stormtrooper. These inhabitants were naturally gifted in the Force and were trained in its ways by none other than the Jedi Starkiller was pursuing. As strong as these Felucians were, they were neither Sith nor Jedi, making them quick targets for the highly trained Sith assassin. As he ran deeper into the jungle, Starkiller felt something odd. He knew that Shaak Ti was powerful and intelligent, having survived for nearly 2 decades after the fall of the Jedi Order. But he also felt that the Jedi Master's activities on Felucia were disrupting the natural flow between the light and the dark side of the Force on that planet. In a way, he had every reason to believe that not even a member of the Jedi Council was in her right mind, especially when it was clear that she was leading some sort of regime on Felucia instead of simply living amongst the natives. Starkiller eventually reached the Felucian village, even going through a rancor to get there, but he noticed that the village was built on a massive living creature. It was a colossal sarlacc, far larger than any other sarlacc known to the galaxy. Known as the Ancient Abyss, it was so massive that an entire city was built between its teeth and gums. In that city awaited Starkiller's next target, Shaak Ti. As the two powerful Force users were about to clash, Shaak Ti remarked that Vader was a coward for sending Starkiller in his place. Undeterred by the Jedi Master's words, the assassin proceeded to attack his target. During the fight, Shaak Ti often lectured Starkiller on Jedi philosophy, but Starkiller simply brushed her words off. As he slowly gained the upper hand in the duel, Shaak Ti used the Force to influence the Sarlacc to attack. Massive tentacles emerged and started attacking Starkiller. It had become a 2-on-1 assault, with the Sarlacc constantly assaulting Starkiller, who used everything in his arsenal to fend off the massive beast and the Jedi. Despite this, his recent battles had made him one of the greatest duelists in the galaxy at this point. While fending off the Sarlacc, he managed to blast Shaak Ti with a barrage of Force lightning. The blast weakened the already tiring Jedi Master to the point that she could no longer stand. As Shaak Ti sensed her end was nearing, she stated that Starkiller was nothing more than a slave, and that the Sith had always been destined to betray each other. The assassin, however, declared his full loyalty to his master. Shortly after, the dying Jedi Master stepped back and dropped herself into the Sarlacc pit, dying in a flash of Force energy. Starkiller had defeated her. As soon as Starkiller reported back to his master, Darth Vader proclaimed that his apprentice was now strong enough. The time was nigh for him to fulfill his ultimate destiny by fighting alongside Vader to take on the Emperor together. He was ordered to return to the Executor. The words of Shaak Ti were still in his mind, but he'd never betray Vader. But unbeknownst to Starkiller, Ti was not talking about him betraying Vader. Instead, she was talking about the Master betraying the student. Chapter 5, Vader's Betrayal. Back in the Executor, after a series of grueling missions, Starkiller could not contain his happiness as he marched into Darth Vader's chambers. He was about to fulfill his life's mission, the very same purpose he thought was always meant to be his ultimate destiny. After all, he had been raised to believe he was the one to kill the Emperor and take his rightful place as a true Sith Lord, ruling alongside Vader in a new order. But Starkiller noticed that the Emperor's flagship was just outside the incomplete Executor, believing Vader had lured him into a trap. The day was nigh, he thought, the day they'd face the Emperor together. However, he was gleefully wrong. Vader corrected him, telling him that Palpatine wasn't there because he had requested him to. Instead, the Emperor's spies had followed Starkiller back to the Executor. Then, in a split second, Vader ignited his lightsaber through the Starkiller's abdomen. Sacking together, Starkiller was in complete shock, pain rushing through him, as he felt himself hanging on to stay conscious. Proxy then entered the room, showing the Emperor's hologram as he communicated through the droid. Palpatine revealed to Starkiller that Vader had forgotten his place by taking on an apprentice, and through that, violated the rule of two. Vader's way of redeeming himself was to kill him. Starkiller couldn't believe it, and pleaded with Vader not to do it. But Vader knew that there was no way out. As Sidious watched, Vader used the Force to pick Starkiller up and started throwing him around the chamber. Finally, he threw him through the viewport into the vacuum of space, where he was supposed to die a cold and lonely death, much to the Emperor's delight. As Starkiller floated through the vacuum of space, he felt the cold vacuum of space and himself dying. But just as he was about to completely freeze to death, a ship picked him up and brought him aboard. It was the Empirical, Vader's science vessel, which had been ordered by Vader to collect Starkiller's body. Despite all the damage he suffered under his master's hands, Starkiller was still alive and barely clinging to life. As the droids aboard the Empirical started mending his wounds and equipping him with life-saving cybernetics, he saw visions and memories flooding through his mind. These were the very same memories he had repressed a long time ago. 6 months later, he awoke. Upon waking up, he felt relief now that the visions were over. But reality was worse. He was restrained on a laboratory table with Vader standing above him. As he recalled all the recent events, he felt rage. For the first time in his life, he showed true rage in front of Vader, accusing him of trying to end his life and betraying him. But Vader tried to calm his apprentice down, telling him he never tried to kill him, but only gave in to the Emperor's demands because he had no choice. Then he gave Starkiller two options: either re-enter Vader's service, or refuse and die in the laboratory that was set to self-destruct. With no other options, Starkiller hesitantly accepted the offer, returning to his master's side as his apprentice once again. But trust, once shattered, is nearly impossible to put back together. Starkiller was now slowly letting his doubts about the Sith creep into his mind. Still, he listened to his master's new plans. Vader told him that Palpatine's spies were watching his every move, and that he currently couldn't move from the Emperor's side. To that end, he needed a distraction to divert attention away from him. That was Starkiller's next purpose. So, in lieu of assassinating surviving Jedi and Imperial officers, Starkiller was given a new mission: to raise an army of rebels and dissidents to oppose the Emperor and start a galaxy-wide rebellion that could possibly allow Vader to catch Sidious off guard. Now, instead of constantly communicating with Vader, Starkiller was given the freedom to do whatever he wanted to pursue his objective. The only condition was for him to sever all ties to his past except for Proxy, so that the Emperor would never trace Starkiller's new mission back to Vader. As Vader cut his transmission, it was revealed he was never there, but was merely communicating to Starkiller via Proxy's ability to mimic people. Chapter 6: A New Mission. After conversing with Starkiller as Vader, Proxy was overjoyed that Starkiller survived, as it meant he could still fulfill his goal of killing him himself. Shortly after, they hacked into the Imperial's navigation system and set it on a collision course for the nearest star, forcing the duo to make their way to the Rogue Shadow. But Starkiller quickly asked about Juno's whereabouts, to which Proxy responded that she was alive on board, being held as a traitor for her association with Starkiller. Then, as the duo met Imperial troops along the way, Starkiller drew his lightsaber, quickly realizing that he was wielding the very same weapon he retrieved from Rahm Kota after blinding and defeating the Jedi Master. Whatever the case, they quickly went to Juno's cell to rescue her, even as Proxy cautioned Starkiller that he was going against Vader's order to sever his ties with the past. But the assassin didn't care because he needed Juno. Subconsciously, he also wanted her around, especially after spending so much time together with her during the missions. Starkiller reached Juno to rescue her, obtaining her assurance that she would leave the Empire behind while continuing to work with him. With Juno agreeing to go against the Empire, Starkiller was able to keep her in the dark about his continued alliance with Vader, even though he was already harboring doubts about his master's plan for him. With Juno back in the fold, the trio escaped the Imperial before its destruction as she skillfully flew the Rogue Shadow out of danger. Starkiller, meanwhile, gave Juno the freedom to choose their destination after telling her about his plan of rounding up allies against the Empire. But there was also something else he told Juno. He wanted to find a teacher to show him the aspects of the Force that Darth Vader kept from him. While Vader told him that the dark side was always going to be with him before they parted ways, Starkiller's visions and doubts prompted him to seek the other side of the Force, the light. To that end, the crew decided to find Rahm Kota, knowing he had survived his duel with Starkiller. The search for Kota took the crew on a trip back to Nar Shaddaa before going to the ancient Sith world Ziost. Finally, they discovered his last known location on the planet Bespin, where he had retreated as a depressed and drunk old man. Rahm Kota was a shadow of his former self. The once great Jedi and military genius had resorted to drinking his sorrows down to the last drop of alcohol. His blindness not only took his sight, but also his connection with the Force, leading him to a life of misery and hopelessness. But after realizing that the Empire had also found Kota's location and was about to send one of their most dangerous agents after him, the Rogue Shadow crew rushed to Bespin, reaching Kota before the Empire did. He found him in a cantina, and he approached the blind man by masquerading as a Jedi. Kota didn't seem to recognize him through the Force, but also proved to be very drunk and uncooperative. And not too long after, they found themselves in danger when a local stormtrooper garrison attacked. For the first time, Starkiller fought the Empire as if they were truly his enemies, instead of simply wiping out witnesses to his assassinations. But while Kota hid under a table, Starkiller struggled with keeping up with his disguise as a Jedi because he needed to ensure that innocent bystanders were not harmed in order to gain Kota's trust. So, in a short time, he went from killing witnesses to protecting civilians. Starkiller also struggled in his escape from the Empire because he had to drag a drunk old man along. Kota was uncooperative the whole time, often trying to escape on his own to get away from the unknown Jedi dragging him out of hiding. Things got worse when Starkiller faced an Imperial Shadow Guard and was too distracted to realize Kota was already escaping. With no choice, the former Sith assassin dropped the act and used the dark side to quickly defeat his opponent before Kota could make himself scarce, or, in the worst case scenario, get himself killed. As Starkiller began his search for Kota, he wondered about the Shadow Guard's identity before realizing it couldn't have been one of Vader's secret warriors. Instead, it was most likely affiliated with Palpatine. Another one came, giving him more trouble than the first before eventually overpowering him. But it soon got tougher because as soon as he got to the dock where he would meet up with the Rogue Shadow, the area was filled with Imperial troops, including 2 more Shadow Guardsmen. The incredibly tough battle forced Starkiller to fight on pure reflex, deepening his connection with the Force as he thrashed his enemies around like rag dolls. And as soon as he destroyed every single one of his enemies, that was when Rahm Kota appeared, not as a drunk old man, but as an unimpressed Jedi who thought the young Starkiller was skilled, but not yet strong enough to dent the Emperor's army. Circumstances were different this time compared to when they first met. This time, Starkiller appealed to Kota's sense of honor to reason with him. The old Jedi finally agreed to join him, revealing he had been in contact with an old friend in the Imperial Senate looking to go against the Empire. However, Starkiller's improved connection with the Force after his skirmish with the Empire on Bespin proved to be crucial. He felt the Jedi Temple on Coruscant calling for him, as he believed he needed to return there for a 3rd time to face one more test. Chapter 7. Final Trial. Even though this was Starkiller's 3rd time visiting the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, the 3rd time was not the charm for the Imperial garrison stationed there. Though their forces were now reinforced with more troops and skilled soldiers, the Imperials didn't stand a chance against the rogue assassin. Starkiller cut through the Imperial forces before entering the Jedi Temple and realizing there was a path that led to a lower-level tunnel. The tunnel led to one of the top towers of the Jedi Temple and brought him to the old Jedi Council chamber. But as soon as he entered the chamber, he saw a vision of his master dueling a Jedi who was unknown to him at the time. It was the duel between Vader and Galen Marek. However, things were different in that vision because Galen defeated the Dark Lord. Still unaware of this Jedi's identity, Starkiller came to his master's aid, believing the vision to be real, and that Vader was in actual danger. But the Jedi attempted to talk some sense into Starkiller, encouraging him to turn away from the dark side of the Force. The young apprentice, however, said that the dark side was all that was left of him. Thus ensued a duel between Starkiller and Galen, with the younger Force user using his raw power to defeat the Jedi. Starkiller stabbed Galen through the abdomen as the older fighter apologized to him before vanishing. It was right then and there that some of his memories came back to him. Starkiller had just killed his father in that vision. This was no longer an ordinary trial for him. Instead, it had become a mission to learn more about his father. Starkiller had the Rogue Shadow bring him to one of the other spires on the Jedi Temple, where he fought Imperials once more before reaching the Holocron Vault. This was the part of the Jedi Temple where they stored data about the Jedi on information storage devices called holocrons, and only those who could use the Force gain access to the information in these devices. As Starkiller approached the main holocron, he activated a message left by his father, telling him his destiny was his own, and that he needed to complete all the Jedi trials. At that point in his life, Starkiller had never lived life on his own terms. He was simply following orders from his master. But, urged by his father's memory, he decided to finally take the final trial and fell into another Force vision that forced him into a fight with a mysterious duelist. This Dark Spectre didn't hesitate to engage him in a lightsaber duel. Starkiller managed to knock his enemy's helmet off, revealing to him that he had been fighting his own self. But this version of him was pale and twisted, a much darker Starkiller that had completely fallen into the dark side. Shocked by the revelation, Starkiller hesitated, allowing his enemy to drive him to a lower level within the labyrinth of his own mind. The fight was brutal and tough, but Starkiller overcame this much darker version of himself by finding an opening and driving his lightsaber through his opponent's back. However, as he woke up from that vision, he realized that his left hand had become similar to the clawed version of the Dark Warrior's arm, which made him realize that he would never escape the darkness within himself. He returned to the Rogue Shadow to try to discuss with Kota what he experienced in the temple, but the old Jedi, still stubborn and directionless, ended the conversation by telling him that it was none of his business. Chapter 8. The Homecoming. While it was true that Rahm Kota was no longer the Jedi Starkiller fought in Nar Shaddaa, the old man was still useful. He had been communicating with his contact in the Senate, eventually learning they need to go to Kashyyyk. Kota's contact assured him that if they retrieved what he wanted, he would give him his full support in their mission to oppose the Empire. The Rogue Shadow crew made its way to this once verdant planet, only to realize that the Empire had ravaged Kashyyyk's landscape by building a skyhook, which was meant to shuttle Wookiee slaves to Imperial starships. While Starkiller was yet to recall that this was not the first time he had been on this planet, this was not the Kashyyyk he once knew a long time ago. At that time, however, everything seemed new to him because he didn't know that this place was the one he once called home. Starkiller made his way through the forest in this effort to find what Kota's contact wanted him to retrieve. As soon as he got a better look at the skyhook from the ground level, he was struck by how it resembled one of the things he saw in his visions when Vader's droids were reconstructing him on the Empirical. He couldn't make sense of it because he had yet to remember that he had been to Kashyyyk before. Using subtlety in this mission, Starkiller used a mind trick on some of the troopers he encountered. He learned about an Imperial base that had a guest in the lodge at the center. This time, there was no longer a need to be subtle with his approach, as he attacked the base and defeated a contingent of stormtroopers, including an AT-ST. He made his way into the main lodge to search for the item Kota's contact wanted. After an extensive search, he couldn't find anything he thought was valuable enough for the contact to give them such a dangerous mission. In his search, however, he met a civilian, the mysterious guest he had found out about earlier. Starkiller came face to face with Alderaan's princess, Leia Organa, a scene that oddly matched one of the visions he had on the Empirical. Initially, however, the princess wasn't too friendly with Starkiller, believing him to be one of the Emperor's assassins while dismissing the possibility of him being Rahm Kota's ally. As far as Leia was concerned, Kota died on Nar Shaddaa. Leia also mentioned her father, Senator Bail Organa. Starkiller quickly deduced that Organa was Kota's contact in the Senate, feeding him information about Imperial targets. It turned out that Leia was being held hostage on Kashyyyk because the Empire knew that Senator Organa already had doubts about Imperial rule. They were afraid of him speaking out against the Empire and inspiring other systems to rise up against the Imperial tyrannical rule. So, they used Leia as a bargaining chip against the Senator. As the meet and greet progressed, Starkiller convinced Leia that Kota had survived and that he had been charged to retrieve her. Leia agreed to go with the plan under one condition, that Starkiller would destroy the skyhook before it could be used to shuttle the Wookiees out of Kashyyyk. Charged with the destruction of this Imperial contraption, Starkiller proceeded with the plan while Leia stole a shuttle that allowed her to leave the planet. Meanwhile, Starkiller took a tube down the cliff to reach the forest below. Not too long after, he found an old hut surrounded by a dark presence in the Force. Kota communicated his concerns to Starkiller, telling him to leave the ruined hut alone. But this darkness in the Force kept on calling to him, making him curious as to what had caused such a disturbance. There, he found evidence of a lightsaber duel, with burned slash marks on the walls. Starkiller also found a small blue crystal on the floor. Upon picking it up, he experienced a strong Force vision, where he saw Vader killing his father and abducting the young, orphaned version of himself from his home. Then, the vision took him to a different scene, where he was forced into a contest with himself. This time, it was different from what he experienced on Coruscant. He was the Sith warrior, and his enemy was the Jedi version of himself. In what was a brutal duel, the Sith version triumphed by ultimately stabbing the Jedi through the heart. Starkiller soon snapped out of the vision and was back in the hut, with the ghost of his father apologizing for all that had happened to him. For the first time in many years, Starkiller heard his father calling him by his birth name, Galen. The young man formerly known as Darth Vader's secret Sith assassin remembered that he was Galen Marek. While the discovery of his origins did indeed shock him to his core, he left the hut as a different person from the one who entered it. Still, he needed to be Starkiller to achieve his goal of destroying the skyhook. He used the structure's moorings using the Force, throwing TIE fighters into them. But when he was about to deal the final blow to the structure, Ozzik Stern, the captain of the Imperial troops on that planet, confronted Marek in a heavily modified all-terrain Kashyyyk transport. It was the very same machine he used to hunt the Wookiees down. But because the AT-KT wasn't built to handle Force lightning, Starkiller made quick work of the captain. He eventually destroyed the Skyhook seconds later, completing his mission on Kashyyyk. However, Galen wasn't too happy after this successful mission. He was angry at Kota for withholding information about Organa being his contact. The Jedi General admitted that Organa was indeed his contact, and that the Senator had tried to recruit him to rescue his daughter. But because of Kota's condition, he wasn't fit to rescue Leia. So instead, Organa went to Felucia to seek Shakti's help and had yet to make contact with them, unaware that Starkiller had already killed her. For now, he thought it to be better to keep Shakti's death to himself. As soon as the conversation ended, Marek tried to find solace alone before Juno approached him. She wanted to know what was bothering him. At this point, she could tell when he was deeply in thought. Starkiller refrained from opening up, but offered to take over piloting duties for their trip to Felucia to give Juno time to rest. Chapter 9. Gathering Allies. On the way to Felucia, Starkiller did some digging on Bail Organa and realized that there was something oddly familiar about the Senator, though he wasn't sure what it was. Still, he focused on the mission of finding Organa, dead or alive. This time, however, the Empire was also on Felucia, unlike the last time when Marek only had to deal with the locals. They found Organa's shuttle, but the Senator was gone. Juno, having felt unease for some time now, used the opportunity to raise the issue about the possibility of Rahm Kota finding out about their former allegiance to Darth Vader. The dark side in Starkiller came out once again, assuring Juno that they would kill the old Jedi if ever he were to find out about their continued allegiance to the Empire. As Juno's worries intensified, Starkiller diverted the matter to their mission of convincing Organa he was sincere with his intentions of forming a rebel army against the Empire. He realized convincing the Senator was going to be much harder than convincing a blind and drunk Kota and a teenage Leia. But as he made his way through the jungle, Marek was surprised that Felucia had shifted more toward the dark side after Shakti's death. Though he had spent most of his life immersed in the darkness, Starkiller felt uncomfortable about the planet's dark side. The planet's various dangerous creatures and harsh terrain made him reflect on the true nature of the dark side and how it was probably impossible for nature to have complete harmony, concluding that the conflict between the two sides was what the dark side fed on. He made his way back to where he last encountered Shakti, only to find out that the Empire had taken over the Felucian village and restrained the massive Sarlacc. Any surviving Felucian hid deep in the ancient abyss to take refuge against the Empire. But as he felt a deeper connection to the dark side, Starkiller traveled north from the Sarlacc toward the Rancor graveyard. As he searched the graveyard, he realized that he had never met Bail Organa before. Instead, the familiarity with the Senator came from the Force visions he had when he was dying. This was the very same reason why he was familiar with Leia, but he also felt a stronger concentration of darkness as he dove deeper in his search for Organa. He eventually found the Senator and freed him, explaining that he was allied with Rahm Kota, but the Senator told him that Maris Brood, Shakti's former apprentice, had gone mad and fallen to the dark side, keeping him on Felucia in the hopes of trading him to the Empire in exchange for leaving them alone. She was the darkness Marek felt on that planet, and the very same reason why Felucia was now leaning more toward the dark side, unable to regain its balance. But before Starkiller could escape with Organa, Brood arrived on her Rancor. She was once more a familiar face because Starkiller had seen her in one of his visions as well. In the ensuing battle, Marek managed to defeat the Rancor by attacking from the inside, forcing Brood to fight her one-on-one. Starkiller was on the defensive, parrying and blocking every one of Brood's raw and aggressive attacks. As he was defending himself, the Sith apprentice came to the conclusion that they were very similar. He thought that if Brood had succumbed to the dark side so easily, she could also turn back to the light side as quickly. This was one of the things he learned from his previous duel with Shakti, who told him that the Force was fluid and that light and dark were but mere directions. He also came to the conclusion that fighting Maris Brood didn't mean he was turning his back on the dark side. Instead, he was merely fighting her because she was in his way. With that thought in mind, Starkiller quickly changed tactics, going on the offensive using the more aggressive Juyo form to break Brood's concentration. Starkiller eventually overpowered her, using the Force to slam her into the ground so badly that she had to surrender. Brood, however, asked for mercy, telling Marek she would turn back from the dark side if he were to spare her life. Starkiller was skeptical at first because he saw that Brood's skills were not worthy of the dark side, focusing more on survival rather than power. He let her go, though Organa thought doing so was a bad idea because she reminded him so much of a fallen Jedi he once knew. Unbeknownst to Marek, the Senator was talking about Darth Vader himself. Despite Organa's disapproval, Starkiller asserted she was never going to be truly free because the ghost of her actions would continue to haunt her. Back on the Rogue Shadow, Organa told Kota that an open rebellion was too dangerous at the moment, and that they needed to show potential allies that the Empire had weaknesses they could exploit. Disappointed by the Senator's refusal to rebel, Starkiller agreed to meditate on how to best find a vulnerability within the Empire, to convince possible rebels that there was hope. But he never meditated. Instead, he sent a message to Darth Vader for the first time since their last encounter, asking his master about such a targeted weakness they could exploit. As he was waiting for his master's response, Starkiller evaded a surprise attack from Proxy, who was using the Anakin Skywalker module. Unfazed because he had already beaten skilled Jedi Masters, Marek easily defeated Proxy. At that moment, Vader's response arrived, turning the Anakin version of Proxy into a hologram of the Sith Lord himself. Vader was satisfied with his apprentice's progress and told him that the best target would be a newly constructed Star Destroyer shipyard on Raxus Prime. But after giving him his newest target, the Dark Lord admonished Starkiller for developing emotional attachments to his new allies, reminding him where his true allegiance belonged. As the transmission ended, Proxy returned to his usual self, telling his master that he always hated being Vader, to which Starkiller replied that Vader probably also hated being himself as well. But what they didn't know was that Juno had been around the entire time, listening in on the conversation. She was angry that Starkiller was still loyal to his master after everything they've been through. However, she also believed that Marek was still the key to a future rebellion, believing that the fate of their budding rebel force was in his hands and not in Vader's. She also asked him not to force her to leave behind this life she had grown to love, having already lost the life she had when she was with the Imperial Navy. Marek gave serious thought to what Juno told him, conflicted about walking his own path or simply following the one his Dark Master had laid before him. So, after their conversation, he replaced the crystal in his lightsaber with the very same blue one he found in his family's home on Kashyyyk. The crystal turned his saber's blade blue, not only signifying that this was truly his own lightsaber, but also that he was already having misgivings about his allegiance to Vader. Meanwhile, Juno and Proxy told the rest of their crew of the plan on using the Empire's colossal ore cannon on Raxus Prime to destroy the Imperial Star Destroyer shipyard. But as Starkiller prepared to depart to take on this mission, Kota asked if there were any news on Kazdan Paratus, who he knew hid on that planet. Juno told him there were no updates on the former Jedi Master, with Starkiller showing sympathy, unable to tell everyone that he ended Paratus' life a while back. But as he progressed through his mission on Raxus Prime, Starkiller couldn't shake off the thoughts of wanting to spend his life with Juno. He was distracted by the idea of being with her, only to receive a message from Juno telling him that Drexel Roush, a dangerous Rodian scavenger, was somewhere in the area, together with his gang. Disappointed in himself for losing focus, Starkiller paid more attention to the mission before fighting off an ambush from the Rodian scavengers. They were angry at him for bringing the Empire to the planet after defeating Paratus and his droids, who were the only reasons why the Imperials couldn't easily take over Raxus Prime. But while Marek tried to reason with the scavengers, the gang opened fire on him, forcing him to go on the offensive. Roush tried escaping with his jetpack, however, Starkiller knew he was a liability, because the Rodian gang leader knew of the apprentice's involvement in Paratus' death. He redirected Roush's flight path, killing the Rodian. After defeating Roush's gang, Starkiller began plotting a plan of attack as he was nearing the ore cannon. That was when he pondered on the limits of his powers, realizing that he simply knew how to kill and destroy. Unlike the Jedi, his mastery over the Force was basic and crude because he didn't know any higher levels of mastery. This made him understand that it was impossible to rule the galaxy with brute force alone, and that the only reason the Emperor and Vader were powerful was because they used the galaxy's fear to their advantage. Just as he neared his destination with the cannon, Starkiller fended off an ambush by a shadow guard. But this guardsman was different from the one he had fought before. Instead, it was Proxy disguised as one, as the droid had judged that Starkiller had grown to become vulnerable, often losing himself to his thoughts and doubting his destiny. The droid's primary objective had always been to kill Starkiller because that was Vader's way of keeping the apprentice sharp and strong. However, with Marek now confused about his actions, Proxy believed he could finally defeat his master, often switching from one module to another. Starkiller easily defended himself, having defeated every module Proxy used. However, the droid had a trump card, one he had kept hidden until the time was right. He transformed into the Sith Lord Darth Maul, a powerful Dathomirian Zabrak once regarded by Darth Sidious as a worthy apprentice. But despite the droid's best efforts, not even Maul's fighting style was a match for Starkiller's raw power. The Force Adept disarmed the droid, who almost fell from the platform. Starkiller's attachment to his longtime friend, however, forced him to grab onto Proxy's lightsaber hilts to pull him back up. But shortly after doing so, he disarmed the droid and pinned it against a pipe with Proxy's own lightsabers. With Proxy defeated, Starkiller proceeded to complete his mission. He overloaded the cannon's railgun tracks to redirect its fire to the shipyard, destroying it. But one of the Star Destroyers survived the explosion and was about to crash to the surface of Raxus Prime directly at the ore cannon where he was standing. Knowing he didn't have enough time to escape the impact, Kota advised him to use the Force to control the massive ship's landing. Starkiller had never done something so crazy before. Pulling apart Imperial walkers using the Force was already challenging enough. But controlling a ship of this size was an entirely different challenge he initially considered impossible. However, he was reminded of the fact that size and mass were nothing compared to the Force. To that end, he attempted to do the impossible, focusing his entire strength on the falling ship. As he pulled the Star Destroyer down, he was overwhelmed by the scale of the task. He initially tried to draw power from his identity as Galen Marek, but that proved to be futile. Then, slowly becoming desperate, he allowed Juno to surround his thoughts. Starkiller drew strength from the image of her. With that, he managed to guide the falling Star Destroyer into the surface in front of him. As it crashed, a bunch of rubble and the destroyer itself kept sliding at him through the surface. It was chaos. However, having slowed the fall, Starkiller eventually managed to escape the crash site unharmed. As he regained his composure, he heard a disturbance. It was Proxy. The droid not only survived their duel, but also the Star Destroyer crash. But the damage burned out some of Proxy's primary programming, which meant that the droid's guiding programming of killing Starkiller was no longer in effect. Proxy, however, felt that the damage had rendered him useless, and asked his longtime master to leave him behind. Marek had grown attached to his droid, refusing to leave him alone. To him, Proxy was no longer just a training droid, but was a friend, the longest companion he had ever had. His attachment to the droid proved to be the reason he could never abandon Proxy, useful or not. More importantly, the destruction of the Star Destroyer shipyard made the Empire look vulnerable for the first time since its inception. Word of what happened on Raxus Prime began to spread, reaching key areas all over the galaxy. With that victory, Kota managed to set up a meeting with Garm Bel Iblis of Corellia on Cloud City to discuss a possible alliance with Starkiller. Bel Iblis was one of Palpatine's biggest critics in the Senate, and his resources would have been invaluable to the budding rebellion. The rogue Shadow crew returned to Cloud City for the first time since rescuing Rahm Kota from alcoholism. But when they got there, they learned that it had been overrun by criminals led by the Mandalorian Chopa Notimo. The chief administrator told them that Garm Bel Iblis had left to try to negotiate with the criminals. As such, Kota suggested that Starkiller confront the Mandalorian to prove his worth as a possible ally for the rebellion. Starkiller blasted his way through mercenaries and Mandalorians alike before learning that Bel Iblis had been captured by a Gungan named Cleef, one of Chopa's underlings. So, knowing that the Senate was vital to his plans, Marek had no choice but to make Bel Iblis' survival his top priority. He made his way to Cleef's location, learning that the Gungan had given the senator to Chopa. Starkiller made quick work of the mercenary, even though Cleef showed impressive skills as a swordsman. After that, he contacted Juno, telling her to ready the rogue Shadow for launch in case he needed a quick exit. Not too long later, he came face to face with the criminal leader. Believing Marek to be a Jedi, Chopa was happy to battle such a worthy warrior. After all, the Mandalorians are known to be proud warriors who relish in fighting the best. But despite the Mandalorian's best efforts, he was no match for Starkiller's Sith training. With Chopa defeated, Starkiller approached Bel Iblis, having already proven his worth as a possible ally. He suggested the idea of mounting a rebellion against the Empire. Thankful for rescuing his life, Bel Iblis agreed and assured his savior that he would contact Rahm Kota as soon as they were ready. Chapter 10: Vader's Return. With Garm Bel Iblis in the fold, the rebels now had more supporters than the Senate. Organa, meanwhile, informed Starkiller that he was going to be meeting with Bel Iblis and Mon Mothma, another one of the Empire's more outspoken enemies in the Senate. The meeting took place at Cantham House on Coruscant, but although the meetings were going well, Starkiller couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were now at a dangerous level, especially with more high-profile resistance leaders joining their cause. While the meeting was going on, Starkiller passed the time by sparring with Kota, who peppered him with questions about his past. But the secret Sith apprentice dodged every one of them, not wanting Kota to learn more about his affiliation with Vader. Not too long later, his master finally contacted him, with Juno witnessing the exchange of information between the two. Starkiller informed Vader that all the pieces were falling into place, and that the rebels were yet to completely trust him. He cautioned his master that if the rebels were to discover them communicating, or if they learned anything about his past, their mission would be a failure. But the Dark Lord asserted that he needed to contact him soon. Juno, of course, had some questions about what had transpired, asking Marek about Vader's true intentions. Starkiller simply assured her that Vader wouldn't intervene in the mission, even if he harbored doubts about the apprentice's true allegiance. Ending the conversation, Marek told Juno he was doing what he thought was right for both of them. Upon the conclusion of the meeting on Coruscant, the rogue Shadow crew received word from Organa to travel to Corellia to meet with the leaders. There, they established the rebellion's command structure. Organa's wealth would fund the rebels. Bel Iblis would provide the military hardware. Meanwhile, Mothma would supply the needed soldiers. At the top of it all was Starkiller as the rebellion's leader and figurehead because of his connection to the Force. Suddenly, Rahm Kota appeared all clean and sobered up, declaring that he would also be fighting for the rebellion. This meeting became known as the Corellian Treaty, with the rebellion against the Empire firmly established. But as soon as the Corellian Treaty concluded, the Imperial military attacked. Vader spearheaded the assault, marching into the chamber to order his troopers to take the rebels alive, so that the Emperor could execute them personally. Kota was the only one brave enough to resist, drawing his lightsaber and attacking Vader, only for the Sith Lord to toss him aside like a rag doll. With Kota down, Vader approached Starkiller, congratulating him for his performance. He revealed to everyone that Marek had been his secret apprentice all along, shocking the rebels who felt betrayed. However, as much as Vader was impressed with his apprentice's help in rounding up the rebels, he also knew that Starkiller already had doubts about his true allegiance. Without any further words, he lifted the rounded table up with the Force and threw it at the perplexed Starkiller. Starkiller survived the impact and angrily got up to confront his master. Starkiller questioned Vader's interference in the mission. That was when the Dark Lord revealed that he had lied from the very beginning. The revelation shocked Starkiller, realizing that the very beginning Vader talked about led all the way to his childhood, when the Sith Lord took him in as his secret apprentice. His life had been a lie the entire time. Accepting the fact that Vader never intended to overthrow the Emperor. Vader confirmed this, though he explained that he specifically never wanted Starkiller to be the one to dethrone Palpatine. As Vader tossed him to the edge of a cliff, the former Starkiller believed that he deserved to die for plotting to use the rebels for his own selfish ends. This was the cycle of the dark side, and he had never been in control. The Dark Lord advanced, ready to kill the boy he personally raised in secret. Defiant until the very end, Marek told the Sith Lord that he would never be free without him. But just as Vader was about to deal the final blow, Obi Wan Kenobi attacked the Sith Lord. Caught off guard because he had just seen a shadow of his past, Vader fought Kenobi, eventually defeating him to reveal that this was Proxy all along. But in the middle of the fight between Vader and Proxy, Starkiller lost his grip of the cliff ledge and fell to the bottom. Vader destroyed Proxy and looked off the edge, assuming Starkiller had been killed and left the scene. Unbeknownst to Vader, though, Starkiller had survived the fall. Juno, aboard the Rogue Shadow, arrived just in time to find Starkiller barely clinging on to consciousness. As Juno helped him aboard the ship, he eventually revealed to her his birth name, Galen Marek. She became the first to know his real identity outside of the Starkiller codename Vader gave him years ago. To that end, the former apprentice wanted Juno to know him as Marek and not as the lie called Starkiller. Chapter 11, Last Stand. After Vader's latest betrayal, the former apprentice refused to be called Starkiller. Instead, he reclaimed the name Galen Marek, and for the first time, he was no longer a Sith, because he proclaimed himself a Jedi like his father before him. Armed with his renewed resolve, Marek decided to save the rebels by tracking both Vader and the Senators. In his hope of doing so, he entered into a deep meditative state in an attempt to provoke a Force vision that would help him find where Vader had taken the rebels. While he was successful, he saw multiple visions of the future, almost getting overwhelmed by what he saw. But instead of looking at all the possible scenarios, he focused on the common elements to discover the location of the rebels. They were on board the incomplete Death Star in the Horus system. With Galen about to embark on what would be the greatest and most meaningful mission of his life, he and Juno exchanged their last words, with Juno wondering whether or not he would survive. Marek didn't mince his words. There was a chance he would die in that rescue attempt. Knowing this was quite possibly her final moment with Galen, Juno rushed forward to kiss him on the lips in a show of affection. Initially surprised by Juno's action, Galen returned the embrace, eventually parting ways after their first and last kiss as the reformed Jedi prepared to enter the massive Death Star. One of the first things he did in the Death Star was to mount a revolt, freeing Wookiee slaves to keep the Imperial troops occupied while he tried to find the location of the rebels within the massive superstructure. He eventually recruited some of the Wookiees to guide him to the Emperor's location, considering these slaves knew more about the Death Star than the soldiers. Marek followed the Wookiee's instructions, allowing him to get closer to the Emperor's observation dome. Though he had to fight off a shadow guard reinforced by 4 red guards, the former Sith assassin succeeded in reaching the Emperor's location. But as soon as he charged along the corridor leading to the observation dome, he was greeted by a familiar dark entity in the form of his former master. Igniting his lightsaber, Darth Vader acknowledged that Galen had become strong in the Force because of his training. But he also declared that he still had much to learn, believing Marek was not yet strong enough to beat him. Reinforced by his newfound allegiance to the light side of the Force, Marek countered by saying that Vader had nothing left to teach him. The Dark Lord quickly overwhelmed his former apprentice with powerful strikes that made Marek realize he was now fighting a much stronger opponent compared to any of the Jedi and Sith holograms he faced. Though he felt the impact of Vader's attacks through his body, Galen found his composure and mounted a counterattack that made the Sith Lord rethink his plan of attack. At that moment, Marek realized that this was the first time he had fought his former master as an equal. Before that moment, Vader often held back because his former apprentice had yet to reach his level. But in that final duel, no one was holding back, as the former Starkiller was seemingly just as strong as the man who taught him the essence of the dark side. The battle went back and forth, with the combatants eventually landing in the throne room, where Palpatine and the senators watched. Galen started mocking his former master by telling him that he himself had broken free of his control. On the other hand, Vader was yet to break free from Darth Sidious's hold over him. To that end, it was as if Marek was telling Vader that he had surpassed him because he had the strength and willpower to follow his own path, whereas the cyborg Sith Lord was too weak to separate himself from his own master, Darth Sidious. These words enraged Vader, who drew more power from the dark side to intensify his attacks. But this played right into Galen's hands, as he started using Ceresu, the very lightsaber form Vader struggled against when he fought Obi Wan Kenobi in the past, which worked almost perfectly against the Dark Lord's flurry of offense. And as soon as he found an opening, Galen blasted Vader with Force Lightning, putting his former mentor onto the defensive for the first time in that fight. With the Dark Lord vulnerable, Marek threw everything he had at Vader and managed to slice off part of his throat armor, as well as most of his mask and helmet. He had just beaten his former master. As Vader kneeled there defeated, Galen contemplated whether or not he should finish his former master off once and for all. But then Marek saw that Vader was not an intimidating figure after all. Instead, he was a sad old man with eyes full of pain and exhaustion. He couldn't finish off someone in such a state, even if Vader never hesitated to betray him. He was a Jedi now. As Galen was still contemplating, Palpatine approached him to congratulate the Jedi for his victory. True to his nature as an insidious and conniving Sith Lord, Darth Sidious used the opportunity to pull Marek back to the dark side, offering Galen to replace Vader at his side. The Emperor's offer was too good to pass up. Marek hesitated because a part of him wanted to be the hope the rebels wanted, but at the same time, he still wanted revenge on Vader for what he did to him and his father. The conflict brewed within Galen, making it more difficult for him to decide his destiny. Rahm Kota, sensing the conflict within Marek, intervened by snatching Palpatine's lightsaber with the Force before rushing the powerful Sith Lord himself. But Palpatine easily defeated the blind Jedi by blasting him with Force lightning. Bail Organa then tried to appeal to Marek's sense of good and help Kota. Seeing Kota and Bail there and the violence of the Emperor, Marek realized he didn't want to go back to the dark and violent past he once lived in when he believed he was the ultimate Sith warrior. He came to understand that killing Vader would not change anything, whereas the rebels could change the fate of the entire galaxy for the better. With that, he had made his decision, resisting the urge to kill Vader and refuting the Emperor. With that, Galen proceeded to attack the Emperor, who managed to pull his lightsaber out at the last second to block Galen's attack. True to Darth Vader's estimation of Marek's potential, the young Jedi was indeed Palpatine's equal in the Force. No one gained an edge in that duel, with Galen matching Sidious's abilities in the Force and lightsaber combat. As the fight raged on, Palpatine started revealing to Galen that he was never a secret apprentice. Instead, everything was according to the Emperor's plans, claiming to have been the one who ordered his abduction from Kashyyyk. Vader was nothing more than a proxy master because Sidious was Galen's true master the entire time. But the revelation only enraged and strengthened Marek. In a surge of power, he managed to overwhelm Palpatine and threw him against the ceiling of the Death Star with a powerful Force blast. Palpatine dropped to the floor, laying there. Galen took the opportunity to toss his comlink to the rebels so that they could contact Juno to pick them up while he dealt with the Emperor himself. Then he advanced on Sidious, who was getting on his knees. As Galen advanced slowly, Sidious declared that it was Marek's destiny to destroy him by giving in to his hatred, so that he may take his place as the next Dark Lord of the Sith. But instead of killing the Emperor, Galen extinguished his lightsaber, deciding to do what was right, no matter how much he wanted to destroy the Sith right then and there. As the rogue shadow landed nearby, Galen told Kota to get everyone aboard. The Emperor, however, still had some fight left in him, blasting the Jedi General with Force lightning. Not wanting to see Kota suffering because he had become more of a master to him than Vader or Sidious, Marek took the brunt of the attack himself. This was the most painful thing he had ever experienced in his life. It was as if a star was igniting within his chest, causing so much pain and suffering. The sheer power of Palpatine's Force lightning was worse than anything he had ever endured from Vader's brutal training. Somehow, he found the strength to overcome the pain, absorb the energy, and redirect it to the powerful Sith Lord. With no other option left because Vader had regained his strength and was now pursuing the rebels, Galen grabbed Palpatine by the shoulders and redirected the Emperor's attack, forcing the Sith Lord to feel the full strength of his own power. At that moment, Marek was driven by the desire to save his friends. So, in one final show of power, he embraced the Force completely and released all of the energy inside him, resulting in a massive shockwave that devastated the entire throne room, knocking all combatants back. In the aftermath, Galen laid on the ground of the throne room. He could feel all life leaving his body. He then focused his thoughts on Juno, saddened that they couldn't spend the rest of their life together. As his consciousness faded, he whispered his birth name one last time, before death finally took him. His final act of bravery was more than enough for the Force to deem him worthy, and Galen Marek's spirit became one with the Force. Chapter 12, Epilogue. Galen Marek was dead. Palpatine and Vader, meanwhile, survived the powerful blast and rappelled themselves up. Palpatine was most displeased. Not only did he lose a potential ally who could have surpassed him, but he also had to be burdened with a diminished Darth Vader staying by his side as an inferior disciple. He also had to worry about the rebels' plans of mounting a full-scale revolt against his empire. So, in a way, the rebellion was a product of the Sith Lord's machinations from the very start. By manipulating Galen into rounding up the rebels, they inadvertently sealed their own fate later down the line. But that wasn't all that Marek did. His duel with Sidious drove a wedge between the Sith Lords. Vader now realized his master wanted to replace him all along, prompting him to truly find a powerful apprentice to take Sidious down. Galen was essentially the reason Vader desired to overthrow his master, something he had never given any serious thought to in the past, even while he was training Marek as his apprentice. Meanwhile, the rebels, inspired by Galen's martyrdom, launch a full rebellion against the Empire. Juno and Bail eventually return to Corellia to recover Proxy from the snow. The droid, although damaged, was repaired and revealed that Marek had told him that he would be in charge of protecting Juno in case anything were to happen to him. Immediately after that, they met up with the other rebel leaders on Kashyyyk, using the Marek's family crest as the Rebel Alliance's symbol of hope. While the galaxy went on to forget Galen Marek and his sacrifice, the rebels and their successors in the future continued to use this symbol without knowing that they were honoring one of the greatest heroes the galaxy had ever known. Finally, Juno asked Kota if he knew all along that the same assassin who blinded him was the very same one who created the Rebel Alliance. The blind Jedi revealed that he had always known the truth about Galen Marek, and that despite the dark thoughts clouding the former Sith assassin's mind, he knew that the only reason he never fully gave in to the darkness was Juno herself. Chapter 13. The Clone. 6 months after Galen's death on the Death Star, Vader brought his body to Kamino. Vader still desired an apprentice, and wanted to clone his former apprentice into a more obedient and powerful version. After several failed attempts, the clone called Subject 1138 was eventually stable, and even more powerful than the original Galen Marek. Unfortunately for Vader, though, the clone inherited a lot of Marek's memories. As the clone had feelings for Juno resurfacing, he eventually escaped Kamino and took on the Starkiller moniker, because he refused to be called by his template's real name. Despite wanting to be different from Marek, the new Starkiller retained the same feelings he had for Juno Eclipse, prompting him on a quest to find her. The new Starkiller eventually found out that Vader had captured Juno. After confronting the Dark Lord, the clone defeated Vader and rescued Juno. But before Starkiller could leave with Juno, Vader told him that he would always control Starkiller's fate, as long as Juno Eclipse lived. Starkiller left Vader behind and left with Juno, joining the rebellion. Vader would then once again clone a new apprentice using Galen Marek's body, and this one turned out to not have inherited the memories, and was even able to kill a hologram version of Juno without any remorse. When Subject 1138 attacked the cloning facility on Kamino with rebel soldiers to confront Vader, Vader gets beaten once again and captured. His penultimate Galen Marek clone didn't come to his aid as he had planned. With that, both Galen Marek and his clone had completed their destiny, with the Jedi setting the foundations of a victorious Rebel Alliance, and the new Starkiller living the life with Juno that he always wanted to have.